In the first three Mishnayot from Mishnah Megillah 3, several rabbis consider the permanent state of a synagogue's holiness, ultimately holding that whether a Jewish community is actively using a synagogue or not, the building always retains a sacred character and must be treated in light of that. While the Mishnah concludes that the synagogue has a forever holy character, the rabbis here fail to answer a crucial question. Why does the synagogue remain a perpetually hallowed place? We know their conclusion, but how can we construct the reasoning that accounts for the synagogue's residual holiness? As I hope to show in this presentation, Mishnah Megillah 3:1's chiastic structure provides an answer. The location of the Torah-scroll at the center of the town bestows an enduring holy character upon the synagogue. In the second half of this presentation, I will turn to the Roman world to show that Roman neighborhoods also featured centrally located objects, which were statues to deities or human heroes, and these were somewhat akin to the role of the Torah-scroll in the Rabbinic world. The key difference, however, between the Rabbinic and Roman understandings of the boundaries created by these central objects concerns their opposing force. The force generated by the object in the Rabbinic world is centripetal. The Torah scroll draws objects or spaces to itself to be sanctified. On the other hand, the force of the Roman world central object is centrifugal. The Roman statue encourages movement away from the center of the town and toward the boundaries of the empire. To consider the first question, why is the synagogue a forever holy place, we will begin with a reading and analysis of the primary text of Mishnah Megillah 3:1, paying special attention to the chiastic structure and the centrality of the Torah. It is the object toward which all other spaces and objects are directed and on which they turn. Beginning with Mishnah Megillah 3:1, townspeople who sold the town's open space may purchase a synagogue with the proceeds. If they sold a synagogue, they may purchase an ark. An ark, they may purchase Torah scroll coverings. Torah scroll coverings, they may purchase biblical books. Biblical books, they may purchase a Torah scroll. But if they sold a Torah scroll, they may not purchase biblical books. Biblical books, they may not purchase Torah scroll coverings. Torah scroll coverings, they may not purchase an ark. An ark, they may not purchase a synagogue. A synagogue, they may not purchase an open space. To summarize this Mishnah, it mandates specific uses for money earned from the sale of holy spaces and objects, from open space in a town to a Torah scroll. Specifically, it says that one must always use money from the sale of a holy space or object for a more holy purpose. That is, one can take money from the sale of a synagogue and purchase an ark, a more holy object than a synagogue, but one cannot work backwards from the sale of a synagogue to purchase a less holy thing. So, money earned from the sale of a synagogue, for example, cannot buy the less holy open space. As evidenced by the constraints placed on the use of the funds associated with each object in this list, and also the direction in which the funds can be used, more holy to less holy purchases, the rabbis do conclude here that some objects are more holy than others. Thus, this Mishnah exemplifies what I call a hierarchy of holiness. At the top of the hierarchy, that is the most holy object, we have the Torah scroll. And this Mishnah creates a chiasmus, where all the elements in the list fold in on themselves. On the way down the list, we go from objects of lesser holiness, a town's open space, to greater holiness, ultimately being a Torah scroll. But the second half of the list reverses that, hence the chiastic structure. We move from objects of greater holiness, the Torah scroll, to lesser holiness, a town's open space, with a negated structure. With this preliminary textual work now complete, we can return to the central question: what imbues the synagogue, in the eyes of the rabbis, with its perpetually holy character? To answer this question, we must realize how central the Torah scroll is for this Mishnah's list. Note that all other spaces and objects here are folding in on the Torah scroll. Their interaction with the Torah scroll apparently gives these objects their own holiness. To borrow a term from the field of physics, the Torah-scroll exhibits a centripetal force. It pulls everything in this Mishnah's list toward itself. We can best imagine this relationship between the most holy Torah scroll and the other objects and spaces in this list from the Mishnah by using a visual rendering of concentric circles on the second page of the handout. The Torah is the central ring, and the other objects and spaces are contained in circles around the central one. While each circle grows larger and thus moves away from the Torah's center, by nature of the concentric circle relationship, each space or object represented by one of the circles does share the same center of the Torah, even though they are all at different radii from that central Torah point. This means that the Torah scroll's force touches every space and object. The Torah literally affects everything. Crucial for our inquiry about the perpetually sacred nature of the synagogue is one of the concentric circles around the Torah scroll's central point. The synagogue shares that Torah scroll center. The Mishnah thus indicates that the synagogue is forever sanctified because of its relationship to the Torah. The Torah scroll's force is so powerful to draw everything to itself, even in a way that the rabbis can't really put words to, but they can try to represent in literary style through the chiasmus. An object or space that shares the Torah center, which includes the synagogue, cannot escape the pull of the Torah's centripetal force. In a section of Seth Schwartz's book, Imperialism and Jewish Society, where he performs a reading of this very Mishnah, Schwartz nicely summarizes my own position regarding the Torah scroll's effect on the synagogue. He says, quote, "The synagogue's sanctity was derived entirely from the Torah scroll," end quote. He continues and makes explicit that the synagogue's forever holy character results from, quote, "proximity, physical or conceptual, to the Torah scroll," end quote. Simply put, the Torah scroll permanently transfers holiness to the synagogue. We know this also because of the two Mishnayot that follow the first Mishnah's chiasmus. In Mishnah Megillah 3:2 and 3:3, the rabbis limit the purposes for which a sold, destroyed, or otherwise inactive synagogue may be used, as well as the activities that may happen inside its boundaries. For example, using the building as a bathhouse or a privy is not allowed, and treating the synagogue as a place for mundane activities, such as using it as a shortcut, is also impermissible per the Mishnah. In this way, the synagogue is always set apart from a normal building where ordinary activities can take place with no issue. The rabbis would not need to place these limitations on the use of a synagogue building if not for the synagogue's forever holy character, thanks to its proximity to the Torah scroll. In the latter half of my presentation, I'd like to consider the Roman world and their conception of centrally located objects, somewhat similar to the role of the Torah scroll as conceived of in the Mishnah. Before getting into the specifics, I should note that this comparison is relevant because the rabbis live under Roman rule in Roman Palestine. Roman culture was the dominant culture in which the rabbis existed. To better understand the rabbis' historical situation, we should pay attention to the Roman world and note points of similarity and points of difference. Ultimately, I am interested in gathering evidence to get at the larger question of cultural construction. How much borrowing from the surrounding Greco-Roman culture do the rabbis do in creating their post-temple rabbinic culture? I certainly won't be able to answer that complicated question in this brief presentation, but I will present a striking similarity between how the rabbis and Romans implement a central object in their towns, and also a striking difference between how the rabbis and Romans think about the force that this object possesses. Just as the rabbis imagine the Torah scroll as the central object of their towns, with the Torah scroll sanctifying objects and spaces in relation to it, so too the Romans had central objects in their towns, which were sacred shrines or statues. But the key difference is that these Roman objects had a centrifugal force, inspiring movement away from the neighborhood center where the statues were located. The statues sent people out from that middle point and toward the bounds of the Roman Empire. fulfilling the Roman imperative of imperial expansion. We'll get back to this point in a moment. First, to contextualize this discussion, the ancient Romans believed that many lares, those were spirits or gods, guarded their cities. Ovid attests to the multiplicity of these lares, writing in Fausti, quote, "The city, Rome, has 1,000 lares," end quote. The Romans also erected shrines to these deities, which were most often found in an area of the city known as the Compitum. Using a definition from ancient Roman historian Bert Lott, the Compitum is, quote, "literally a crossroads where streets met, but in its urban form, a street altar or shrine for the neighborhood's lares," end quote. In other words, people could find shrines to lares at these centrally located crossroads in the neighborhoods, at these compita. Additionally, I'll note that from my study of ancient Roman texts, some of the shrines at these compita were not dedicated to the gods, but rather to mortal heroes. We'll see the significance of that point soon. Returning to now consider the shrine's centrifugal force, I use this concept, borrowed from physics, to talk about these Roman shrines because the shrines inspire an imperial outlook that sends people away from the center of the neighborhood where the shrine sat. That is, centrifugal. Shrines to lares, the guardian spirits, were tangible reminders that the lares would protect the Roman people, and thus they should not fear taking up arms on behalf of the empire and its expansionist project. With regard to the statues of heroes in neighborhoods, these statues emphasize that some Roman ancestors chose to leave the safety of their neighborhood and fulfill the Roman imperative of imperial expansion. They were then honored with a statue that immortalized them. In either case, I believe that these statues were meant to send a particular message to the ancient Romans who saw them inside the safe boundaries of the neighborhood, at the compita, the crossroads. To those who would fight on behalf of the empire, there were two positive outcomes. Either the lares, the guardian spirits, would protect those Romans from harm, or they would be forever memorialized in the form of centrally located statues for their heroism. To conclude this rabbinic Roman comparison, both the rabbis and the Romans agree that centrally located objects, whether they be the Torah-scroll or statues to deities, have an effect on the entire town. The Torah-scroll sits at the center of concentric circles, sanctifying objects and spaces that share its center, despite those objects and spaces being different radii from that central point of the Torah-scroll. The Torah-scroll exhibits a centripetal force, pulling components of the rabbinic town toward itself to touch them with its holiness. Likewise, a Roman statue is also at the center of concentric circles, with the rings surrounding the statue being neighborhood, city, and empire. But in contrast to the rabbis, the Roman statues existed to direct people to flee the center. This is the concept of the statue's centrifugal force at play. And instead, people were to seek the ever-expanding edge of the empire. At first glance, the rabbis and Romans seem quite similar with their placement of a central object, whether it be the Torah scroll or a statue to a deity or human hero. But upon farther examination, we see that these central objects serve opposing purposes. They have opposing forces, literally. First, from the Mishnah, we learn that the Torah scroll draws objects and spaces to itself so that they can receive some of its holiness and be forever changed because of that contact. In short, the Torah scroll has a centripetal force. And thanks to the synagogue's proximity and relationship to the Torah scroll, the rabbis in the Mishnah reason that the synagogue is a forever holy space, again because of that relationship to the central sanctifying object of the Torah scroll. Yet, from our brief study of Roman texts and material culture, we learn that the central statue in Roman neighborhoods has a centrifugal force. That is, it sends people away from the safety of the neighborhood and toward the outermost circle of the empire. With that comparison, our tale of two centers has now come to a close.